Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Have you ever wondered what goes into a successful Ivy League application? I went to Columbia and my husband went to Harvard, and I'm going to be breaking down all of our numbers and all of our strategies that I think may have helped us get in without actually being perfect candidates. I'm going to be covering our grades, our test scores, our extracurriculars, and our essays, as well as two other little bonus pieces that I think could actually give you a leg up in the application process. The reality is that college admissions are getting more and more competitive by the year. The Harvard admissions rate last year was under 4%, which is absolutely crazy. And if you're into this type of content, come back next week where I'm going to be exposing all of the salaries that I made in my 20s while working in tech. So let's dive in. How do we do it? Newsflash, we weren't actually that special. Before we get into the numbers, I do want to touch on one piece that a lot of people see as a barrier to applying to these schools, and that is finances. Neither of us actually came from particularly wealthy backgrounds. I think that these schools are stereotyped to have the image of being full of super rich kids and prep school kids, but this wasn't actually the case, and this wasn't the experience that I had attending Columbia. In fact, nearly 50% of Columbia students receive some sort of financial aid. I received a substantial amount of financial aid, over half of my tuition, and it allowed me to go to Columbia without having a family who could actually afford the school. Now, let's dive into the key puzzle pieces that I think helped my husband and I get into Columbia and Harvard. Let's start with the first piece of the puzzle and what I think is probably the most important, and that's grades. For the Columbia class of 2027, 18% of the student body was valedictorian of their high school. This is the first part where I did not have a perfect application. My husband, on the other hand, went to Harvard, and he was also the valedictorian of his high school, so he did fit under this percentage. Here's the thing about grades. Colleges understand that every single high school calculates grades differently. Some schools allow for a 4.5 GPA or 5.0 GPA, whereas other schools have a scale out of 100. Mine did the latter, so I had a 96-point-something GPA, which wasn't the top student, but it was enough to end up in the top 5% of my graduating class. Something to focus on no matter how your high school calculates grades is the rigor. So this could mean taking the hardest classes that your school offers or taking a lot of APs. For example, I took 8 AP classes and I scored within a 3 to 5 for all of them. My husband took 10 AP classes and he scored a 5 on every single one. Next up, we got test scores. Love them or hate them, they're a massive filter for Ivy League admissions. When there are thousands of applicants who have perfect grades and perfect extracurriculars, test scores are a very efficient way for the admissions team to narrow down the field. Instead of using an average score, the Ivies use what they call a middle 50% of admitted student score. Let's see what this means. The Columbia middle 50% score is 1510 to 1560. So that means that half of the students who got accepted into Columbia got somewhere between 1510 and 1560. In that case, that means that 25% of students got more than 1560 and 25% of students got less than 1510. This gives us a better distribution of the data than just using an average. I took the SATs back when it was at a 2400 and I got a 22.8. In today's scoring, that would mean that I got a 1520. And that would have put me at the lower end of the middle 50% for Columbia. My husband, on the other hand, had a 2340. And so in today's scoring, that would be 1560. And so with a 1560, my husband would have been on the higher end of that middle 50% for Harvard accepted students. If you fall within this range, it's a really easy way for the university to just put a little check mark and funnel you through the rest of the process. Next, we have the substance behind the numbers, and that is what colleges like to call being well-rounded. And this is a little bit of a black box. You don't really know what they want. You don't really know what they're looking for, but you feel like you got to do it all. Your extracurriculars show colleges that there is something behind the grades and there's something behind the numbers and that you have passions and interests outside of studying. This can look like a super focused activity that you devote all of your time to, or a variety of different activities and a variety of different passions. They want to see how you spend your time outside of the classroom. So what did I do outside of studying? My really big extracurricular was that I was on the debate team for all 4 years of high school, and I ended up being captain for my junior and my senior year. Some of the smaller things that I did is that I wrote for the school newspaper, I was part of some volunteering organizations, and I was also part of student government. I was on the swim team outside of school, but I wasn't really good at that. I just really liked swimming and I thought it was fun, and my mom really wanted me to get some sort of activity outside of studying. In terms of my husband's extracurriculars, I don't have his full list, although I do know that he was part of the football team and he was also really into music. He's a brilliant musician. He's one of those people who can listen to a song one time and then play it on any instrument just after listening to it one time. And that was a really big passion of his. I also know that he did some of those quiz bowl type teams. I think it was called Academic Decathlon, and they did win a really big award. I think it was state championship in California for that. The trophy is literally like 5 feet tall, and it just sits there like 20 years later in our garage. I have a friend at Columbia who literally was a flamethrower at a circus while doing science research, while being a high school debater. She's a neurosurgeon now. So she was really, really special. If you're worried that your extracurriculars are not unique enough, just shine where you can, and that'll help you stand out. If you choose a sport, aim for captain or state champion. If it's academic, go for some state awards or a deep research project. Colleges love that depth and they love that passion, and they love to see that shine through your application. The next important part of your application is the essay. It tells the colleges who you are and what you love to do. The thing with essays is that it gives you the opportunity to tie your entire application together like a little present on Christmas morning. It's a really good way to tell your story. I do think that if you're on the cusp, it could make a difference. But if your stats and your grades just aren't really there, I don't think it's really going to make a huge difference if you haven't already passed all the filters that the university is trying to check off. And if your application is already really strong, it'll just confirm to the university that they are making a really solid pick. One of the next pieces of the puzzle is what I call the high school advantage, and that is attending one of the high schools that sends a lot of students to elite universities. I call these the feeder schools because they literally feed into schools like Harvard, Columbia, and other elite universities. Take a look at this infographic that the Harvard Crimson released that shows which high schools its student body came from. The way you can read this infographic is if the name of the high school is coming up bigger, that means that a lot more students from this high school went to Harvard. This is a really clear way to show that some high schools are really disproportionately represented in the Harvard student body. For example, a lot of the Boston schools like Boston Latin School, as well as a lot of the prep schools like Exeter, Andover, etc. My high school was a public school, and so is my husband's, so you absolutely do not need to attend a private school in order to get into one of these top universities. So just keep that in mind if you ever feel discouraged. My husband did not go to a feeder school, and he still got into like half of the Ivies, including Harvard and a ton of other elite universities. I just do think that for me in particular, going to a feeder school or a school that has a very direct pipeline to elite universities really helped me get through, even though my application was not perfect. If you're not at one of these schools, build strong stats and really compelling extracurriculars. One of the most important pieces of the application, in my opinion, and when you look at the statistics that do back it up, is whether or not you applied early action or early decision to the school. If you have all the stats, if you have all the check marks, it's going to give you an advantage if you apply early. In case you're just getting started with your research, let's talk about what early action and what early decision mean. Early action and early decision is an option that some universities have in which they open up an application deadline earlier than the usual application deadline. But there are a couple of catches. If you're applying early decision and you get in, you have to go to that school. If you apply early action and you get in, you don't necessarily have to go to that school, but a lot of universities only allow you to apply to one school early action. So you got to pick your favorite one and you can just apply to that. Of course, if you don't get into your early decision school, you can apply to any school you want in the regular process. And for early action, you can apply to any school you want during the regular admissions process. I applied early decision to Columbia. The numbers actually show that over the past 10 years, Columbia fills 46% of the spots with these applicants who apply early. That means it's a massive advantage to apply early. Statistician in me wants to take a look at the data, so let's do that. Here I have up a chart from ivycoach.com that shows the admissions rate throughout all the Ivies for early action and early decision. Keep in mind, Princeton does not have the option to apply early, and that's why it only has one bar. I think that this chart truly speaks for itself. The orange bars show the acceptance rate for regular decision, whereas the green bars show the acceptance rate for early decision. As you can see, all across the board, the green bars are more than 2 times bigger than the orange bars. So that means that the acceptance rate when you apply early decision is 2 times higher than the acceptance rate once you get into the regular applicant pool. The other thing to note is that all of these schools fill at least 40% of their freshman class with early action and early decision candidates. That means that by the time you apply regular decision, almost half of the class has already been filled. So there's even less spots available for that huge influx of applications that come in the new year. Mathematically and just logically, your odds are always going to be better if you're applying early decision or early action. Think about it this way. Is it easier to stand out when your application is in a pile of 1,000 valedictorians or 10,000 valedictorians? Obviously, even if you have a perfect application, your application is going to stand out more if it's in a pile of only 1,000 other perfect applications instead of 10,000. So if you're a top choice school or you're just trying to optimize the application process, it will probably be to your advantage to send an application in early. My husband's dream school was actually Stanford, and he applied early to Stanford. And guess what? He did not get in. So instead, he had to go to Harvard. I know, a tiny little violin is playing for him in the background. But he got into a ton of great Ivy Leagues, including Harvard, in the general round. This just goes to show that sometimes there's no rhyme or reason to this application process. In conclusion, the Ivy League admissions process is wild and unpredictable. If an Ivy League acceptance doesn't come for you, there are so many different paths to success, no matter how you define that. And a path to success doesn't have to come from where you went to college. In fact, I think a lot of times that actually isn't the reason that you are successful. It's your ambition and your hard work that's going to help you really get to those goals that you're aiming for. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it this far, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and stick around for next week where I'm going to be exposing every single salary that I made while working in tech. That's right, every single salary. I'm not holding anything back. I think as ladies, it's important to have this out in the open because that's really how we move forward and are able to have complete transparency when it comes to salaries. Good luck, and I'll see you in the next video.